And Bill Archer said how you get along with people. Yeah, that's until you introduce a bill. But thank you very much, Bill Archer, for that very warm welcome and introduction. And as Bill said, we've known each other for many years. And, I value both his friendship and the insight he provides me now from time to time in a role that he once had. And Bill was not my first chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. That was actually Dan Rostenkowski. And then my third chairman was Bill Thomas. So obviously I've worked with a broad range of personalities. But each of my predecessors, Republican and Democrat, has taught me a great deal, just as the Tax Foundation has. This organization consistently provides the resources, the research, and the data that Congress needs to understand the impact of tax policies. And so please join me in applauding the Tax Foundation's work and congratulating them on this very special milestone, the 75th anniversary of the Tax Foundation. Lately, as I've thought about tax reform, both the work we've done and the work we've yet to do, the 1986 effort keeps coming to mind. And some things are different, and some things haven't changed at all. There certainly weren't any iPhones or iPads, and Android sounded like something out of the hit movie The Terminator. And in 1986, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a former cyborg, and now he's a former governor of California. I'm not sure which one you'd list on your resume, or me either, but undoubtedly there are some striking similarities between 1986 and today. Then we had divided government with President Ronald Reagan and Speaker Ronald Reagan in the White House and Speaker Tip O'Neill in the U.S. House. Then we had an economy in peril. Unemployment was at 7% in October of 1986 when the Tax Reform Act was signed into law. And of course, Charlie Rangel was on the Ways and Means Committee. And like I said, some things never change. But there are substantive differences too. Since 1986, there has been an exponential growth in pass-through entities, such as LLCs and S corporations, whose incentives to invest and create jobs are a function of the individual tax rates rather than the corporate rate. Our deficit has skyrocketed from a few $100 billion to more than $1 trillion. And international competition has exploded. Places like China, India, and Brazil are real competitors, and several EU countries have already implemented aggressive tax reform. Now, the Tax Reform Act of 1986 actually started several years earlier, and the roots of that reform are actually found in both the Democrat and Republican parties. Some labored away in Congress, others labored away in the basement of the U.S. Treasury, where they worked, and the goal was obviously keep the momentum and the movement moving forward. Tax reform wasn't something to be finished in a matter of days and weeks, as some are suggesting we do today. Instead, it came about in a manner, as many other things have, with true meaning and lasting value. And methodically, meticulously, and as a result of the work done on both sides of the aisle. And similar to 1986, Washington began serious work on tax reform several years earlier. And Senator Ron Wyden has introduced a tax reform bill every Congress since 2005. And more recently, he's had both bipartisan co-sponsorship. And then Chairman Rangel, and he put out a bill in 2007. Simpson Bowles laid out an aggressive framework in 2010. And my very first hearing in the 112th Congress was on tax reform. And since then, the Ways and Means Committees held more than 20 events on tax reform to examine what's working, what's not working, and what we can do differently. And we produced draft legislation last year that would bring America's international tax system into the 21st century. And we moved to lower the top rate for families and job creators of all sizes. The House of Representatives has passed budgets for the last 2 years that include a combination of pro-growth tax reform and spending restraints that economists will predict will create up to 1 million jobs in the first year alone. And key members of the Senate have also started to plant seeds for comprehensive tax reform as well. And here I'd like to thank and applaud my good friend Max Baucus for his leadership in this effort. And while some spent the last few months of the campaign denigrating tax reform, Max has never wavered. And during 3 joint Ways and Means and Senate Finance hearings on taxes, the first held since bicameral tax writers examined a war profiteer tax more than 70 years ago, our colleagues in the other body have called the code antiquated, overly complex, and an anchor on job creation. They've consistently stated that tax reform is necessary to strengthen our economy, and I couldn't agree more. Admittedly, in the absence of one big bill, many in America might have known that so many were doing so much to advance tax reform. But then a funny thing happened. The presidential elections began to take shape, and tax reform became a part of the mainstream conversation. Now, it'd be easy to hang your head and say that the problems are just too big. The work is just too hard. But as Chairman Rostenkowski said in 1985, don't let yourself get misled. The tax reform train is moving, it's picking up speed, and there's a real danger that doubters will be left behind at the station. Those same words and that same sentiment holds true today. Tax reform is more necessary now than it was in 1986. And that's why the Ways and Means Committee will write, act on, and pass comprehensive tax legislation in 2013. And just let me repeat that. We intend to move a comprehensive tax reform bill in 2013, no matter what. Now, whether 1986 is a playbook for tax reform is still unknown. One thing that's virtually undisputed, though, is that tax reform always takes leadership from the Oval Office. Now, nearly everyone who worked on the 86 Act has said that it required the leadership of the President of the United States, and President Ronald Reagan made tax reform a cause. He gave it a voice. He put it on a platform because he believed it was critical to produce policies that reflected a government that was working for the people rather than for the special interests. President Reagan dedicated immense resources and political capital to advance his mission, and he worked with Democrats to make that mission a reality. In doing so, Ronald Reagan and the Reagan White House reached out to the American people and to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. He worked with Democrat Senator Bill Bradley, Democrat Congressman Dick Gephardt, Democrat Ways and Means Chairman Dan Rostenkowski, and Speaker Tip O'Neill. So the president has a choice to make. The current president has a choice to make before the end of the year. Does he simply want to stand for higher tax rates on top of a broken code? Or will he support comprehensive tax reform that strengthens our economy? I've said it time and time again, and that won't stop me from saying it again tonight. Comprehensive tax reform is the path forward. Tax reform can get the revenue for the president and the Democrats that they're insisting on. And tax reform can get more economic growth and job creation for the American people that so many Republicans have been talking about and insisting on as well. As chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I urge President Obama to show leadership that's necessary, and I ask him to join us to make comprehensive tax reform a reality. Now, when the 1986 Tax Act was finally complete, the headline in the Washington Post said it best by calling tax reform the impossible that became the inevitable. Actually, I should be quoting the Wall Street Journal, Daniel. I'm sorry about that. Next time. But I'd like to see that headline again on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I hope that you would too. There's still so much more to do, and I'm depending on all of you to help us get tax reform across the finish line. So I want to thank you and congratulate you on your 75th anniversary for all you've done. Please continue to be part of the coalition to advance comprehensive tax reform that spurs economic growth and job creation. And I look forward to our continued work together. And thank you for this award. I'm very honored, and good luck and have an enjoyable evening. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.